My name is Vance Rudd. I am 49. I run a small HVAC business out of Boone, North Carolina, and I called my father 22 times between September and April. He picked up twice. The second to last time, I drove to his house. My sister met me on the porch, arms crossed, and told me he was asleep. I could hear the TV through the screen door. I said I'd wait. She said he didn't want to be disturbed. I'm handling things now, Vance. I speak for him. I said, okay, got back in my truck, and drove 6 miles to the Ingalls parking lot on 421, where I sat with the engine running. Then I made one phone call. 6 weeks later, a state investigator walked into my father's house and found something nobody was supposed to see. On his wrists. It had been there a long time. If this is hitting close to home, hit like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read them. Let me take you back to September, where this really starts. My father, Harmon, is 77. He drove a county school bus for 31 years without missing a day. He told me that about 400 times. After my mother passed in 2019, he kept the house going himself and called me most Sunday evenings. Last February, he had a routine hip replacement. My sister Sheila, 44, married to Kent, who runs an auto parts store in Newland, offered to stay with him for a couple of weeks to help him get around. That made sense. I live 40 minutes away with a business and a crew to manage. I said thank you. A couple of weeks became a month, then 2. By May, Sheila and Kent had moved their clothes in. By June, I was getting voicemails from Sheila instead of my father. I wasn't suspicious in May. I was relieved. I told myself Sheila was doing the hard thing I couldn't do. I told myself Dad was lucky to have her there. It made it easier not to show up. My daughter Cora, 27, is finishing her master's in social work. She called me in early August and asked when I'd last actually heard Dad's voice. I thought about it. 6 weeks, maybe longer. I need you to drive out there, she said. I did. That was the Tuesday in September. Sheila met me on the porch. You know that part. Well, I didn't tell you. Before I backed out of the driveway, I saw a shadow move behind the curtain in the front bedroom window. He was awake. He was right there, and he didn't come to the door. I've kept service logs for 20 years. Date, unit, diagnosis, fix. That night, I started a log on my father. Every call since June. 22 total, picked up twice, both under 4 minutes, his voice careful, measured. In the July call, he'd asked, out of nowhere, son, you still got that old Ford in the garage? I said yes. He said good. It was my grandfather's 1968 F100, sitting in my garage because Dad couldn't drive anymore and wanted it to go to me. As a kid, we used to stash a $20 bill under the passenger seat. Emergency money. He hadn't mentioned that truck in 4 years. I wrote it down anyway, because the small things you don't understand are usually the ones that matter. I need to explain Kent. He'd been in and out of business trouble for most of his 18-year marriage to Sheila. He opened the auto parts store in 2018, expanded within 2 years, took on employees and a bigger lease space, and by 2022, the expansion was bleeding him. He'd taken a second mortgage on their house. By last spring, he owed money across 3 creditors and was months behind on his lease. I didn't know any of that while it was happening. We weren't a family that talked about money. We were the kind that handles things quietly and hopes the other person notices without making you say it out loud. Kent noticed my father's paid off 4-bedroom house on 2 acres and a father-in-law recovering from surgery who'd sign something if you explained it right. In October, Cora spotted a Facebook post. Sheila, captioning a photo of Dad in a long-sleeve flannel shirt on a 71-degree Sunday. Rest and recovery mode. His cuff had shifted, a discoloration, a line above the wrist. Cora asked me to compare his eyes in that photo to a Christmas photo from 2 years back. I did. Something was different. I stood on the back porch for a while after that. I called Agnes Holcomb, 73, a retired ER nurse who's lived 3 houses down for years. The kind of woman who remembers everything she sees and tells you none of it unless you ask. I asked. She hadn't seen Dad outside since June. He used to walk to the mailbox every single morning, rain or shine. She tried to visit in July with a dish. Kent said he was napping. She came back in August, and Sheila said she'd let him know Agnes had stopped by. He never called back. Then, quietly, Agnes told me she'd called Adult Protective Services herself in August. They'd visited. Sheila let them in. They talked to Dad. He told them he was fine. Neither of us had an answer for why. That night, I pulled up the county property records, routine for my job. A new deed of trust had been recorded in July. An $85,000 lien on a house that had been paid off since 2009. The grantor's signature, Harmon Rudd, acting under power of attorney, Sheila Kent. I called Cora. She told me to go to the APS office in person with everything I'd written down. I did. The intake supervisor, Judith, read my log carefully, then explained that if my father had legal capacity and told an investigator he was safe by choice, the law protected his right to make that call, however much it concerned us. I asked whether my sister had been in the room during the first visit. Judith didn't answer, which was its own answer. I asked only that on the next visit, my father get 30 seconds where nobody else was in his line of sight. She agreed to schedule a follow-up. 4 days later, the investigator called to say she'd completed a second visit and that what I described was consistent. That's all she said. It was enough. 2 weeks after that, a certified letter arrived. Sheila had filed for legal guardianship over my father, citing his cognitive decline, his inability to manage his finances, and this is the line I read 3 times. The failure of other family members to provide meaningful support over the preceding 7 months. The same 7 months I'd been turned away at. The door were being used as evidence against me. Cora walked me through what full guardianship meant. Sheila deciding where he lived, who he saw, what he signed, permanently and with the court's backing. I asked Sheila to meet me somewhere bright and public. She showed up 15 minutes late, ordered decaf, and looked at me the way she'd looked at me our whole lives. Like I was a problem she'd been asked to manage. I went through the log calmly, no heat in my voice, and told her I just wanted to see Dad with her there the whole time. She played me a voicemail of his voice, steady and clear, saying he was fine, not to worry about me. I recognized the Hornets game playing faintly in the background, a game from 7 months earlier. Her smile flickered. She told me I'd never shown up for this family, that I hadn't come to a single one of Mom's chemo appointments, and that if I filed anything else with the county, she'd get a restraining order. She had grounds. She left a 5 on the table and walked out. I sat there with her $5 and my cold coffee, and the log still open in front of me. If you've got someone in your life speaking for a person you love, and you've been sitting on your hands, tell me in the comments how long you've been quiet. I was quiet for 7 months, and I'm going to tell you what that cost. If you want to hear what my father said when he finally had a microphone, subscribe so you don't miss it. 3 days later, Cora sent me a screenshot. Dad's church was holding its annual potluck and volunteer dinner, and this year's Neighbor of the Year award, voted by committee, was going to Kent and Sheila for their selfless dedication caring for Dad. He would be there to present it to them himself. I did 3 things, all legal, all quiet. I filed a motion to be recognized as an interested party in the guardianship case and requested a guardian ad litem, an independent attorney, to assess my father's actual wishes. I bought a ticket to the dinner under my own name, so Sheila would see it on the list, and I sent my father a certified letter. Asterisk, I still have your key, Dad. I'm not going to use it. Tell me when you're ready to open the door. Asterisk, the court appointed Rosemary Finch, a family law attorney with 19 years of experience, as guardian ad litem. She interviewed Dad at the house, with Sheila present. Her report said he was oriented and coherent, satisfied with his living situation, and didn't want it to change, but noted at the very end that he'd worn a long-sleeve shirt buttoned at both wrists throughout a 76-degree interview, and declined the chance to get more comfortable. I called her and asked if she'd attend the dinner as a private citizen and simply observe. When she pressed me on what I planned to do, I told her, 1 question, no accusations, no speech. She warned me that a scene could backfire. A judge sometimes just hands authority to whoever looks calmest. I told her the question would only work in that room, at that moment, in front of him. She agreed to come. Back of the room. The night before, Sheila posted in the community Facebook group about everything. Kent had sacrificed to care for her father, and about her brother, never named, but clearly me, hiring lawyers instead of bringing so much as a meal. Agnes commented that she'd lived 3 houses down for 19 years and hadn't been inside that house since June. The comment was deleted within the hour, after 37 replies. The next evening, I ironed a shirt and drove to the church fellowship hall. Cora sat beside me in the 3rd row. Agnes was 4 rows back. Rosemary Finch stood against the back wall with a notepad. Dad sat up front in his long sleeves, in a room that had to be 74 degrees. He scanned the crowd, found me, and gave the small, quiet smile that means asterisk I see you. Asterisk Sheila took the microphone first. She talked about showing up for family, about what love really looks like. Then, without using my name, some people can offer excuses. Some people can hire lawyers. I'm not here to talk about those people. I'm here to talk about my father. And she invited him up to present the award. Dad took the plaque, looked down at it, and said nothing. 5 seconds passed. Sheila started to rise. I stood, raised my hand like I had a question, and stepped into the aisle. Dad, I said, is there anyone in this room telling you what you're allowed to say? 7 seconds. He looked at Kent, whose face stayed still. Then Dad set the plaque down and slowly pulled up his left sleeve. A reddened band circled his wrist, calloused, patterned, the kind of mark that only forms one way, over and over. The room saw it before anyone spoke. He picked the microphone back up. He talked about driving a bus for 31 years, about knowing your route before you can get anyone home safe. Then, plainly, in April, he'd signed a document after too little sleep and too much pain medication, and hadn't read it carefully. That was on him, he said. But since then, he hadn't been allowed to answer his own phone, hadn't been permitted outside alone, and on the days Sheila ran errands, he'd been strapped into his recliner so he wouldn't try to walk unsupervised. I believe they told themselves it was for my safety. I understand that. But I am a man, not a package. He looked at Sheila. Where did the equity in my house go? Because I didn't take it out, and my son didn't take it out. Rosemary Finch stood up from the back row and identified herself as the court-appointed guardian ad litem. 60 people turned at once. Sheila started to say he didn't understand. Dad cut her off gently. I've been driving children home safely since before you were born. I understand. Kent put his face in his hands. The organizer picked the plaque back up off the podium, held a moment, and set it face down without a word. An off-duty deputy came through the side door. I walked up, put my jacket over my father's shoulders, and told the deputy he'd go quietly. He did. The legal process took 5 months, which I'm told is fast for cases like this. The power of attorney was revoked 9 days after the dinner, with Rosemary as neutral witness and Sheila nowhere in the building. The guardianship petition was dismissed. The judge's written order included a sentence I've reread more than I probably should admit, that Sheila's actions reflected a pattern more consistent with the advancement of her own financial interests than with my father's well-being. Forensic accounting found $88 for 100 withdrawn from his retirement accounts and home equity over 7 months. A civil judgment ordered Kent and Sheila to repay it over 10 years with interest. Kent pleaded guilty to financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, a felony in North Carolina, and got 18 months suspended, 3 years probation, and a lifetime bar from any fiduciary role. His store closed in January. I still think about what happened to his employees more than I expected to. Sheila wasn't charged. The DA concluded she'd largely been following Kent's lead and rationalizing as she went. That's still a complicated thing to sit with. The first time Dad and I were really alone again was a Sunday in December. Coffee at his kitchen table. I finally asked if he'd been angry that I missed Mom's chemo appointments. He said he'd never expected me to be in 2 places at once, that Sheila had used it against me whenever things got tense between us, and he'd let her, thinking I already knew the truth of it. I'll let you carry something that wasn't yours to carry, he said. That was my fault, too. Before I left, he brought out a new key. He'd had the locks changed and told me it was mine. I set the old one on the table between us, the one I'd never used in 7 months. He picked it up, ran his thumb over the little spot of orange paint marking it, and said, "I know. I got your letter." He'd kept it, opened and refolded, so many times the crease had worn thin. I slid the new key back to him. He put it in the junk drawer and left the old one on the table. We finished our coffee. There's one thing I've never told anyone else. In the fellowship hall afterward, while things were being sorted out, I sat with Dad and asked if he'd read the letter. He said he'd read it 41 times. He started counting after the 20th. That was the first time in 7 months someone asked me what I wanted instead of telling me, he said. I started planning the next morning. The dinner was 6 weeks out. I needed 6 weeks. He wasn't waiting in that recliner for someone to rescue him. He was working the problem in the only room he had left. I just showed up in time to hold the door. It's spring now. Dad turned 78 in June. He walks to the mailbox every morning. Agnes still gives me a thumbs up from her window when she sees him pass. He's got a home care aide he chose himself on hours he set. I come on Sundays. I ring the bell. He opens the door. 2 weeks ago, I found him on the porch with his coffee, watching Cardinals at the feeder. "You know anything about a '68 Ford that needs an oil change?" he asked. I sat down. "Funny you should ask." He mentioned the $20 his father used to keep under the seat. "Still there," I told him. He smiled and didn't say anything else. We sat there in the spring morning, and neither of us needed to fill the quiet. You don't have to be loud to be heard. You just have to refuse to disappear.